In 1922, on a remote German farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, 6 people were slaughtered with a mattock, a farmer's pickaxe. But the horror didn't stop there. Evidence strongly suggests that for days after the attack, the killer lived among the dead, tending to the livestock and eating meals in the house before simply vanishing. A century later, the case remains one of Germany's most infamous and haunting unsolved mysteries. It's a story defined not just by the sheer brutality of the crime, but by the chilling, almost supernatural events that led up to it and the baffling investigation that followed. This is a case with no witnesses, no confession, and no clear motive. It's a puzzle of strange clues, reports of footprints in the snow that led to the farm but never away, mysterious noises from the attic, and a set of house keys that vanished just before the attack. The story of Hinterkaifeck is a descent into a darkness that has puzzled investigators and amateur sleuths for over 100 years. It forces us to ask a terrifying question. What's scarier? A monster who breaks down your door, or one who might have already been living inside your walls? As we unpack this deeply disturbing case, I want to hear from you. What are your initial thoughts on a killer who stays at the scene of the crime? If you're fascinated by the world's darkest and most perplexing cold cases, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss the details we're about to uncover. Now, let's go back to 1922, to a lonely farmstead in the heart of rural Bavaria. Hinterkaifeck wasn't really a town, it was just the name for a single, isolated property about 70 kilometres north of Munich. The farm was home to the Gruber family, the patriarch, 63-year-old Andreas, his 72-year-old wife Cecilia, their 35-year-old widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. Also living in the home was the new maid, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner. She had just arrived on the very day the murders would take place. The Grubers were known for being private, almost reclusive. Andreas, in particular, had a reputation for being ill-tempered and domineering. The family's isolation wasn't just physical, it was social. Dark rumours circulated in the nearby villages, whispers of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter Victoria, a secret that had already led to a conviction and only pushed the family further from the community. This isolation is key to understanding the terror that was about to unfold. In the weeks before the murders, the farm became the stage for a series of unnerving events. It started about 6 months earlier when the family's previous maid, Crescence Rieger, suddenly quit. She told people she left because she heard persistent, unsettling noises from the attic and felt an oppressive sense of being watched. Andreas dismissed her fears, but soon he'd have his own strange encounters. In March of 1922, just days before the massacre, Andreas confided in his neighbours. He told them he'd found a single set of footprints in the fresh snow, leading from the dense forest right up to the farmhouse. Chillingly, he couldn't find any tracks leading back. It was as if someone had walked out of the woods and simply vanished into the home. The strange occurrences didn't stop there. The family started hearing footsteps from the attic, the same sounds that had driven the last maid away. Andreas searched but found no one. Then, a newspaper from Munich that nobody had bought showed up on the property. Finally, one of the main house keys disappeared. All of these signs pointed to a terrifying theory that an unknown person wasn't just lurking around the farm, but was perhaps hiding there in the shadows, observing the family's every move. The sounds in the attic, the missing key, it all suggested an intruder had already breached their defences. Yet, Andreas was a stubborn man and refused offers of help from his neighbours, choosing to handle the unseen threat himself. It was a decision that would prove fatal for his entire family. The stage was set, the farm was cut off, the family was on edge, and an unknown presence was hiding just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment came on the final day of March. The evening of Friday, March 31st, 1922, was cold and dark. It was the day the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived to start her new life at Hinterkaifeck. It would also be her last. The exact sequence of events that night can only be estimated from the grim scene the killer left behind, but investigators have pieced together a plausible and horrifying scenario. It's believed the massacre began in the barn. The killer, showing a familiarity with farm life, likely created a disturbance with the animals to lure the family out of the house one by one. The first to go was almost certainly Andreas Gruber. As the man of the house, he would have been the first to investigate. There, in the dark, the killer lay in wait. The weapon was a mattock, a heavy farming tool wielded with brutal force. Andreas was struck down. When he didn't return, his wife, Cecilia, likely went looking for him. She met the same fate. Then came their daughter, Victoria, and finally, her 7-year-old child, also named Cecilia. They were all lured into the barn and murdered in the same gruesome manner, with devastating blows to the head. The autopsy would later paint a horrific picture of their final moments, but the most heartbreaking detail related to young Cecilia. The evidence suggested she hadn't died instantly. She seems to have remained alive for several hours after the attack, lying in the hay next to the bodies of her mother and grandparents. In her terror, she had torn out clumps of her own hair. It's a detail so profoundly awful, it's hard to even comprehend. A child's last moments spent in unimaginable fear and pain. With 4 family members dead in the barn, the killer then moved to the main house. Inside, 2 people remained: the new maid, Maria, and Victoria's 2-year-old son, Joseph. The killer entered the home, likely with the key that had gone missing, and finished their ghastly work. Maria was killed in her bedchamber. Little Joseph was murdered in his cot with a single, powerful blow. 6 people were now dead. The isolated farm of Hinterkaifeck had fallen silent. For any normal killer, this would have been the time to run. But the Hinterkaifeck killer was far from normal. The killing was just the beginning. What they did next elevates this case from a brutal murder to a truly legendary tale of psychological horror. After committing 6 murders, the killer didn't run, they stayed. For the next few days, it's believed the murderer lived at Hinterkaifeck, surrounded by the bodies of their victims. This is the single most baffling aspect of the case. Neighbours later reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney over the weekend. An investigation of the kitchen showed that someone had been eating meals. Most unnervingly, the farm animals had been cared for. The cattle were fed and the family dog was found unharmed. This suggests a person with an almost unimaginable level of cold-blooded composure. This wasn't a panicked amateur. This was someone methodical, calm, and disturbingly comfortable in the home they had just turned into a tomb. It pointed to someone who knew their way around a farm, even with the evidence of their horrific crime lying just feet away in the barn. For 4 long days, the farm remained quiet. The family's absence wasn't noticed right away. 7-year-old Cecilia missed school on Saturday, April 1st, and again on Monday, April 3rd. The family, known for being reclusive, didn't show up for church on Sunday. The postman noticed the mail piling up. Slowly, concern began to build. On April 4th, a repairman was scheduled to visit the farm. When no one answered his calls, he looked around but saw nothing amiss and left. Later that day, a search party was finally organised, led by a neighbour named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer and 2 other men entered the barn first. What they discovered would haunt them for the rest of their lives. There, partially covered by hair and an old door, they found the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia stacked together. Reeling from the horror, Schlittenbauer then went to the main house. In a move that would later be seen as highly suspicious, he apparently unlocked the front door with ease and went in alone. Inside, he found the remaining 2 victims, the maid, Maria, in her bedroom, and little Joseph, dead in his cot. The farm of the dead had finally given up its secret. The discovery of the bodies kicked off a chaotic and ultimately fruitless investigation. The moment the search party entered, the crime scene was compromised. Neighbours and onlookers swarmed the farm, moving bodies, touching objects, and generally contaminating any potential evidence before the police could arrive from Munich. The autopsies were conducted right there in the barn. The murder weapon, the Mattock, wasn't found at the scene. It was only discovered a year later, hidden in the attic when the farm was demolished in 1923. Robbery was largely dismissed as a motive, as a large sum of money was found untouched inside the house. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. The evidence suggested it was personal. Over 100 suspects were interviewed in the years that followed, but no one was ever charged. The investigation became a catalogue of dead ends. In one of the most bizarre footnotes to the case, the heads of the 6 victims were removed before burial and sent to Munich for further examination. These skulls were subsequently lost during World War II, forever preventing any modern forensic analysis, like DNA testing, that might have one day identified the killer. The police were left with theories, rumours, and a community full of suspicion. They were hunting a ghost, a killer who had planned their attack with chilling precision, lived among their victims with unnatural calm, and then vanished. In 2007, students at a German police academy took on Hinterkaifeck as a cold case project. Using modern investigative techniques, they analysed the old files and reportedly came to an agreement on a prime suspect. However, out of respect for the suspect's living relatives, they have never publicly revealed the name. The case remains officially unsolved. So, who would do something like this? The investigation produced several compelling suspects. The first, and maybe the most prominent, was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbour who led the search party. Schlittenbauer had a complicated history with the Grubers. He'd been in a relationship with Victoria and claimed to be the father of her 2-year-old son, Josef. Their plans to marry had been blocked by Victoria's controlling father, Andreas. Schlittenbauer's behaviour on the day of the discovery was highly suspicious. He seemed to know his way around the locked farm too well, and those with him said he handled the bodies with a disturbing lack of shock. An anecdote that circulated years later claimed he was found at the demolished farm's ruins and made a strange comment about the ground having been frozen at the time of the murders, which some took as knowledge only the killer could have. Did a dispute over paternity and his thwarted love for Victoria drive him to kill the entire family? The second major theory involves a ghost from the past, Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. Gabriel was reported killed in action during World War I, but his body was never recovered. This led to speculation that he might have survived. According to this theory, Gabriel returned to Germany years later, maybe after hearing his wife had a child with another man. In a jealous rage, he could have sought revenge. There were even unconfirmed reports from German prisoners of war returning from Soviet Russia who claimed a German-speaking officer confessed to being the Hinterkaifeck murderer, but there's no real evidence that Carl Gabriel ever made it back to Germany alive. Beyond these two, police looked at others. The Bichler brothers had worked on the farm, and one of them, Anton, had apparently told the former maid that the Grubers ought to be dead. Other theories pointed to wandering vagrants or disgruntled farmhands. One particularly dark and very fringe theory even suggested that Andreas Gruber himself was the killer, and that after slaughtering his family, he was killed by an unknown accomplice. Each theory presents a plausible story, but none are supported by hard proof, and so we're left with the same questions that have echoed for a century. Why were the murders committed with such brutal, personal violence? Why was a large sum of money left behind? And most hauntingly, why did the killer stay? What kind of person can live for days alongside their victims, tending to the animals and stoking the fire before melting back into the world without a trace? The story of Hinterkaifeck is more than just an unsolved crime. It's a chilling reminder of the darkness that can exist in the most isolated corners of the world, and of the terrifying possibility that sometimes the monster isn't an outsider, but someone who knows you all too well. The truth of what happened on that farm in 1922 likely died with the killer, leaving behind only a perfect and perfectly terrifying mystery. The Hinterkaifeck case is a labyrinth of theories, and those police academy students who last reviewed it seem to believe they know the answer, even if they can't say it. Who do you think was responsible? Was it the jilted neighbour, the ghost husband, or someone else entirely? If you found this journey into one of history's darkest cold cases as fascinating as I do, please give this video a like and subscribe for more dives into the unknown. Thank you for watching.